Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire. Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridyantosti Abhadrani Vidunoti Sahasratam Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order, Chapter 29, Talks between Narada and King Prachinabarhi, verses 64 and 65. Verse 64. Nanubhutam kvachanena denaha drishtamashrutam kadachid upalabhyeta yadrupam yadrag atmani. Synonym: na, never; anubhutam, experienced; qua, at any time; cha, also; anena dehena, by this body; adrishtam, never seen; ashrutam, never heard; kadachit, sometimes; upalabhyata, may be experienced; yat, which; rupam, form; yadrag, whatever kind; atmani, in the mind. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearing. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. Purport: in dreams, we sometimes see things that we have never experienced in the present body. Sometimes in dreams, we think that we are flying in the sky, although we have no experience of flying. This means that once in a previous life, either as a demigod or an astronaut, we flew in the sky. The impression is there in the stockpile of the mind, and it suddenly expresses itself. It is like fermentation taking place in the depths of water, which sometimes manifests itself in bubbles on the water surface. Sometimes we dream of coming to a place we have never known or experienced in this lifetime. But this is proof that in a past life, we experienced this. The impression is kept within the mind and sometimes becomes manifest either in dream or in thought. The conclusion is that the mind is the storehouse of various thoughts and experiences undergone during our past lives. Thus, there is a chain of continuation from one life to another, from previous life to this life, from this life to future lives. This is also sometimes provided by saying that a man is a born poet, a born scientist, or a born devotee. If, like Maharaj Ambarish, we can think of Krishna constantly in this life, Sevai Mana Krishna Padara Vindeo, we will certainly be transferred to the kingdom of God at the time of death. Even if our attempt to be Krishna conscious is not complete, our Krishna consciousness will continue in the next life. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 6.41. Prapya punya kritam lokan usitva sasvita sama suchinam srimatam gehe yoga brashto vijayate. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. If we rigidly follow the principles of meditation on Krishna, there is no doubt that in our life we will be transported to Krishna Loka, Goloka Vrindavan. Text 65. Tenasya tadrasham rajal lingino deha sambhavan shraddha satvana bhuto ruto namana spashtam arhati. Synonym: Tena. Therefore, Asya, of the living entity, Tadrasham, like that, Rajan, O king, Lingina, who has a subtle mental covering, Deha Sambhavan, produced in the previous body, Shraddha Sattva, Shraddhatsva, accept it as fact, Anubhuta, not perceived, Artha, a thing, Na, never, Mana, in the mind, Sprashtham, to manifest, Arhati, is able. Translation: Therefore, my dear king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. Purport: Krishna Bahirmukha Hana Bhoga Vanchakare Nikita Stamaya Tare Japitya Dhare Prema Vivarta. Actually, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the supreme enjoyer. When a living entity wants to imitate him, he is given a chance to satisfy his false desire to lord it over material nature. That is the beginning of this downfall. As long as he is within this material atmosphere, he has a subtle vehicle in the form of the mind, which is a stockpile of all kinds of material desires. Such desires become manifest in different bodily forms. Shila Narada Muni requests the king to accept this fact from him because Narada is an authority. The conclusion is that the mind is the storehouse of our past desires, and we have this present body due to our past desires. Similarly, whatever we desire in this present body will be expressed in a future body. Thus, the mind is the source of different kinds of bodies. If the mind is purified by Krishna consciousness, one will naturally in the future get a body that is spiritual and full of Krishna consciousness. Such a body is our original form, as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu confirms, Jivera Swarupahaye Krishnera Nityadas. Every living entity is constitutionally an eternal servant of Krishna. If a person is engaged in the devotion service of the Lord, he is to be considered a liberated soul even in this life. This is confirmed by Srila Rupa Goswami. Iha yasya hare dasye karmana manasa gira nikhilas api avastaso jivan muktasa uchyate. One who engages in the transcendental service of the Lord in body, mind, and words is to be considered liberated in all conditions of material existence. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1-187. The Krishna consciousness movement is based on this principle. We must teach people to absorb themselves always in the service of the Lord because that position is the natural position. One who is always serving the Lord is to be considered already liberated. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14:26. Mam chayo vabhichare na bhakti yogena sevate saguna samati aitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who always engages in the spiritual activities of unalloyed devotional service at once transcends the modes of material nature and is elevated to the spiritual platform. The devotee is therefore above the three modes of material nature and is even transcendental to the Brahman platform. A Brahman may be infected by the two baser modes, namely Rajaguna and Tamaguna. A pure devotee who is free from all material desires experienced on the mental platform and who is free from empirical philosophical speculation or fruitive activity is always material above material conditioning and is always liberated. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Good morning, dear devotees. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to read these verses for my own purification. And please forgive me for any of my own interpretations while speaking on these verses. So we are in the conversation of Srila Narada Muni. This conversation has been continuing for a few chapters now, where Narad Muni is giving the instructions to King Prachina Barishat. We saw how he did the multiple allegories and everything and trying to really explain what is the goal of life. In this section, Narada Muni is really focusing on the transmigration and explaining to Prachina Barishat what really happens during transmigration. We have also learned from Bhagavad Gita, right? The very popular verse, Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam Yam Vapi Smaran Bhavam Tajayanti Ante Kelevaram Tam Tam Evaiti Konteya Sada Tad Bhava Bhavita. So we know that whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he is going to attain without fail. So it's really that's the same. This couple verses are focusing on that. It's explaining about what happens during the time of death. The subtle body, although the physical material body is destroyed, the subtle body is attached to the soul and is going to continue through the lifetime after lifetime. The subtle body continues. And in this verse, in verse 64, that's the two things. So here basically, King Srila Narada Muni is giving empirical evidences, right? Empirical evidences meaning clear observations, practical observations we can see in this world about how this comes into play. How is that evident? Is that we have multiple stories we have heard about children where they can clearly remember their past life and they can go back and exactly go to the place where they were in the last lifetime, show them where the city was, where the house was, and who their relatives were, all of that. There are so many stories that have been shared from India and also different countries too, where clearly the children can remember where they were from the last time. So that is very clear observation, empirical evidence to how the soul has carried on those past experiences with them. And then secondly, the other empirical observation is that when we dream, it is really our subtle body, right? Because our physical body is completely in resting time, like it's completely like as if it doesn't remember anything, but the subtle body is still awake. So that subtle body, the mind, takes takes the consciousness to places where it has been experienced in the past lifetime. And then you wake up and you think, what was that about? Like, I don't remember going to this place or I don't remember this person, but who was it? That is because of the impressions from the previous lifetime. Like things have never happened in this lifetime, but you can clearly remember, clearly things have happened. Like you can see the clear image of things that happening like that, so that is the couple examples that are being given here to really prove that the subtle body, the mind, is like the storehouse of all the impressions that has come from the previous lifetime. So it's really beautiful to understand that, right? And so the living entity, like as I said, really in summarizing, is that the living entity carries a subtle body, which is the mental body, the mind, and it is filled with impression from previous lifetime. So although the thoughts, images, and ideas arise in the mind, but they are coming from experiences in previous bodies, and nothing appears in the mind without some prior perception, just as past experiences leave the impressions that resurface later. So, in other words, right, our mind is the storehouse, is a continuation of previous lives. Okay, can you imagine that? That's just so powerful, like to remember, to think that our mind is going to be keeping, it's like the data memory in a computer, right? Everything that passes through us, we are catching it and we are not even aware that it is happening, but it is capturing, the mind is capturing everything and going on compiling the data in the storehouse. And then all of this now is going to decide our future body. So this is why we have to be very, very careful, right? So whatever we have done in the past, Our mind carried everything through and gave us this current body that we have today. And then whatever we are doing today, our mind is compiling all that data. And now we are going to go on to our future body, whatever we are going to get next. And here, that is why Srila Prabhupada is really focusing on the thing. Like, so Srila Prabhupada is not interested in this, all these the previous lifetime or the, all that stuff. He is, anytime he gets an opportunity, Srila Prabhupada wants to really focus us on what is important. Now that we learn this is the fact, we see that from observation in our lives. Guess what? Everybody, we have to focus on creating spiritual impressions, because what would happen is the more and more we create spiritual impressions, the more and more we are getting purified, and the more and more we are getting closer to our goal of going back to Godhead, going back to Krishna. So that is the important factor we have to know. And how does that happen, right? Even during the Japa retreat, Yamuna Jivan Prabhu went so nicely with the steps of a devotee's path of how he goes through the different stages, right? And even in Madhurya Kadambini, it is given like the Shraddha, and then we have bhajana kriya, and then we have the association and all of that. So we have to understand that, right? So let's just focus again on how these experiences happen, right? So once we have the experiences, the samskaras are created. What is a samskara? Samskara is the sensory or emotional experience that leave a subtle trace. And these samskaras, these impressions, then will create the desire, right? And the desires then go on to propel us to do an action. And then these actions are creating new karma. So what happens when we get introduced to bhakti? Let's look at that. So when we get introduced to bhakti, usually what happens is the cycle is the experience, the samskara, desire, karma, reaction, and the following birth. But the moment we come in contact with devotees, what happens? We start with hearing, chanting, association. So now this is planting a seed of bhakti. So what happens is now we start accumulating spiritual impressions. Instead of all that material impressions that was getting collected, now guess what? Our spiritual impressions are starting. And then with Shravan, Kirtan, remembrance of Krishna, it goes on enhancing our impressions. And then these purified desires, right? When we have the purified desires, what is the purified desire? Basically, we are focusing on Krishna. Krishna is to be pleased. And it is no more focusing on ourselves. What happens is slowly, 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 there is destruction of all the material samskaras, all the anarthas. That is the anartha nivritti process, right? All that slowly, slowly, slowly starts diminishing. And then what happens is now we are no more getting bound by karma, but rather we are getting, bhakti is burning all the karmic seeds in us. No more material rebirth, but rather our spiritual body is going to be awakening. And then when the spiritual body awakens, that is our constitutional position, and that is then where we are maturing to go back to Krishna Loka. And that's how the cycle of repeated birth and cycle is permanently broken. And really, bhakti is the only process that can do that. And even with this whole holy name retreat, Paraj kept emphasizing over and over and over, our tool to get there is that holy name. So as long as we are really, really paying importance, attention to the holy name, we have all been very fortunate, and we have been given this opportunity to serve the holy name, to serve Srimad Bhagavatam, to create more and more of those spiritual impressions in our heart. So, what would happen is that with this purification, our mind is this mind who brought us through different lifetimes to today where we are. The same mind is now going to be helping us, is going to become our tool to go on to have liberation, in the sense, have our own swarup, like our in constitutional position, and be in that spiritual form to be eternally serving Shishi Radha Krishna. So with that, it is this is really very important verses, and I'm really very thankful to be able to have reviewed these verses, as I said, for my own purification and for my own improvement, and then being very careful, very vigilant that what impressions are we creating every day? What are we doing every day with our lives? Because everything is going to leave impressions on my mind. So just being very careful and not have anything stick to our own mind, but rather focusing more and more on the holy name and creating more of the spiritual impressions in our mind. So that's really what the ultimate goal is for us. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam